The pharmaceutical industry is a complex and fascinating field. It takes countless of people to bring a high quality product to the market. In the Qualitalks Podcast, I bring to you leaders, experts and innovators who will share their experiences and explain to us how they do it. Welcome to the Qualitalks Podcast. I'm Jan Kugel, your host, and my guest today is Alex Hall. Alex has about 30 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. She has also been a qualified person, QP, in short, since the year 2000. In addition, she assessed people who wanted to become QPs in the Royal Society of Chemistry for many years. Now she is an independent consultant and she trains people to become QPs. So today we'll talk about the role of the qualified person and what it takes to become one. Hi Alex, I'm excited to have you here and I'm really happy to have you on the Qualitalks podcast. And today I want to talk to you about the qualified person. I'll call it a QP from now on to make it shorter. So you're a QP since 2000.
That's right.
And right now you're training people to become QPs, right?
That's right, yes. In the UK, we have quite a complicated process.
Before we dive into this story about what it takes to be a QP and so on, can you tell a bit about the role of the QP, especially for the people who are not from Europe? Not everybody has this role, so it's more of a Europe thing.
It is very much a Europe thing. And the role of the QP actually comes from quite a way back in history. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, we had the thalidomide issue and legislation was introduced to manage the medicines. So medicines themselves were authorised through legislation and that came through EU 65/65, but the manufacturing side of things wasn't legislated. And what happened was that in the early 70s, there was a major issue with some manufacturing in a UK factory, and 5 people died because some parenteral medicines, some injectable medicines, were not sterile.
Oh, okay. So it started from the UK, actually, because of some tragic event.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. It's called the Devonport incident. And that started some legislation in the EU in 1975. And that legislation led to the requirement of authorization of sites of manufacture and introduced the concept of somebody who would be overall responsible for the control and quality of the medicines. And this wording in the legislation is a suitably qualified person. So if you are an English speaker or even a non-English speaker, the title of this role is a bit strange. A qualified person. Everybody's qualified in what they do. But the wording of the legislation actually led to the title qualified person. And the qualified person role, it requires some education things and some experience. But essentially we are a gatekeeper in the medicines role here in the EU. And what we do is we oversee almost the entire supply chain of medicines. We look at the active ingredients, what makes the medicine actually work. We look at all the inactive ingredients, everything that bulks up the medicine. We look at all the controls, so all the testing that happens. We look at the manufacturer to make sure that it's consistent and doing what it says it does. And we actually look at all the systems around that manufacture. And we take that as a holistic whole. And with all of the output from that, we say, is this medicine okay to be given to a patient? And if that answer is yes, then we will actually make a signature, and that signature is taken to say that can then go on to the patient.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the difference between a regular quality manager and the QP then?
Okay, so the regular quality manager will have defined responsibilities, and they may actually be doing the same thing as the QP, but the regular quality manager doesn't have the formal sign-off from the authority in that country to be able to make that decision and sign that document to say it can go. So only somebody who's been authorized by the regulatory authority can do that signature.
So they're basically legally bound. and that they can be held responsible if something wrong happens.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
That's why the role is so important. So you were also a qualified person assessor in the UK. So what does it mean that you interviewed people who wanted to be qualified person and you had to give them a grade or a fail or pass, something like this?
That's exactly right, Jan. Yeah. So in the UK, to become a QP, you do have to pass an assessment before you're passed on to the MHRA here in the UK to be considered suitable. So the assessment panel is, we have 3 assessors and you have to have an oral examination. So we ask lots and lots of questions, and as long as you can pass that, then yes, it's a pass-fail. It's not a grade, it's a pass-fail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so either you can do it or you cannot.
Yeah, pretty much.
Who would you say should consider becoming a qualified person?
Certainly, there are people who really enjoy being QPs, and those people, I would say, have a sense of curiosity. Yeah, we do look for quality professionals, but that doesn't mean that other people can't move into that realm. I've certainly seen a lot of pharmacists, community pharmacists, moving into that realm. There are minimum standards, so you do have to have worked in quality to become a QP, but you can obviously join into quality. And what I find fascinating is that the role is so broad-based that you can have lots of different experience to come into it. But the type of people that really do make very good QPs are those who are interested in lots of different things. But you do need to have a curiosity about what's going on. You need to be able to look into lots of things, and you need to be a problem solver.
So you need to love to see the big picture, because as a QP you need to understand and love each part of this chain of manufacturing chain, the supply chain. You really need to understand it, because in the end people come to you with the questions.
People do come to you with questions, absolutely. And I always say that the QP doesn't actually have answers. The QP asks further questions to clarify, and generally, whoever comes to you with a question does actually have the answer themselves, but the QP will help them and they will clarify the picture and let them see what the risks are with various options.
So it's an oversight, and this person also should really be a good leader, in this sake that he doesn't just order things, he needs to listen and help other people to understand the problems.
Leadership is huge. Very often, certainly in the UK, the QP is not in a leadership or a management position, but they have to lead in many examples and areas. So, for example, if there is a potential quality issue where the product needs to be recalled, then the QP starts to take charge of that situation. They start to lead that group of people who are discussing that. And that may have some very, very senior people in the organisation, but the QP is generally the decision maker in that situation. Are we going to recall the product? Are we going to issue a warning to patients? And that does need a lot of leadership activity.
So how do you deal with the politics? So as a QP, as you said, you need to deal with, okay, should we recall the product? Can we release the product? And from the other side, you have the people who count the money and they say, okay, we cannot lose this batch. It cannot happen.
Yep, absolutely. So there are people who would say very definite no and not really give a reason. I'm not one of those. I would always look at the pros and cons and give a balanced risk assessment. So what you're doing is you're saying, well, if you wish to provide this medicine to the patient, what is the risk of the patient not receiving the medicine, and what is the risk of the patient receiving the medicine with this defect? So that you are saying there is a risk in both areas. So there is a difference between providing a defect paracetamol tablet to somebody. So the risk of not sending out a batch of paracetamol is very low because there's lots of paracetamol available. The risk of not sending a niche cancer medication to people who desperately need it is very high. So even if there is a defect perhaps on the packaging, that may still be able to be sent to the patient, but with a warning for the pharmacist to say, this is not quite right, you must be aware of this. So you always have to balance those risks. And what the QP can do is take advice from lots of experts. The QP is a generalist, and we have experts in pharmaceutics, in manufacturing, in pharmacovigilance, and we use that advice to help us generate that risk model. And then we ask lots of questions, and we kind of act as a mirror to those people and to say, really, guys, this is our perspective, and this is the patient. This is where that risk resides, not with us, with the patient.
So it's all about safety and the well-being of the consumer. And you said you need to assess the risks. Do you use additional tools to assess the problem more profoundly?
Absolutely. We use a lot of risk analysis tools, root cause analysis tools. So if we are looking for a cause, then we will use Ishikawa, is not, and 5 whys to determine what the root cause is, because that can sometimes indicate what the risk is, how many batches might be affected, the impact of whether the batches are out on the market or whether they're contained within your facility. We also do use FMEA quite extensively so that we can see the depth and impact of any risk. So we are using those tools a lot in our roles.
So what would you say are the biggest challenges in becoming a qualified person?
As I said, my experience and expertise is qualified person in the UK. And we do have a very complex and difficult process to do it. Personally, I think it makes them very good QPs, and our challenge is to make sure that everybody is well-rounded. And we have a lot of niche manufacturing here in the UK. So we have some fantastic advanced therapy medicinal product production facilities. We have some really good hospital manufacturing facilities, and we have some excellent radiopharmaceuticals. But if you are an expert in those areas, it's really hard to get experience in traditional tablet manufacturing, for example. And we expect here in the UK a QP to be well-rounded. We expect people to have some understanding of all dosage forms. So that is a really big challenge for us here.
So the QP role is a must for the whole European Union, right?
Absolutely.
And do you know what are the differences in becoming a QP? What are the laws between the countries, or are they all the same?
Basic requirements are the same. So you would still need 2 years spent on a manufacturing import authorization site in the control and testing of medicines. And the control and testing is interpreted slightly differently in different countries. And you would need a baseline degree of the right type. So in Ireland, that is interpreted as going through an MSc with their approved MSc course. In Germany, it is interpreted as spending 2 years in the actual testing laboratory. And in other countries, it's interpreted slightly differently. I'm aware of Italy, for example, where you would spend 2 years in the laboratory again. So different countries will interpret it differently. Most countries don't have the examination that we would have here in the UK.
Okay, so when you mean laboratory, you mean research?
No, research laboratories don't generally meet the criteria of working underneath the manufacturing import authorization.
So the quality control.
It would be the quality control laboratory, yeah.
So there is one law, it's been interpreted differently in different countries, like the GMP, right? You can really interpret it in many ways, and you need to do the best practice. So it's the same practically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because it's a directive and then it's interpreted into law. You can interpret it in many different ways.
So what are the main soft skills would you say that are the most important for a QP?
Critical thinking, decision making, and interpersonal skills.
And many of those skills can a person develop with time?
I would say most people can develop those with time. There are certain personality types who find it very difficult to make decisions. So there are some people who I have advised to go in other paths for their careers, but I have also seen people who have been quite tentative at the beginning of their journey to become QPs and have become excellent QPs at the end of their journey. So I would never say never.
So most of the people that want to be QPs come from the quality assurance, or there are also many people who come from manufacturing or quality control?
I would say 70% of people come from quality assurance, quality control backgrounds, but I've seen many people come from other backgrounds, including distribution and, as I said, community pharmacy, for example.
As a trainer, how do you help those people to achieve their goals?
So one of the things that we have in the UK is a QP study guide. And that QP study guide expands on the basic requirements that are in the directive of what a QP should know and understand. And we provide training modules, as we call them, based on the QP study guide that we have here. And I do training courses based on those QP modules and provide the academic side of the training that's expected for QPs. In addition, one of the things that I do for our QP delegates, as we call them, is I help them develop those less tangible skills that the QP needs. So I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, a lot of one-on-one with QPs, and I will help them work through the kind of scenario that you might come up in a normal QP day at work.
Okay, so it's really interesting. Like I say, you do simulations with them.
Absolutely.
Can you give us some example of such simulations or such scenarios that are pretty difficult?
For sure. For example, say you have a batch of tablets and you've had some production loss of that batch of tablets. Fluid bed dryers, for example, the sock at the top comes loose and you lose a lot of powder. Is that batch certifiable? Could you send that batch to the public? And the answer is, it depends.
So it depends on what happened, why it got lost, or then you need to assess what really happened, what caused it, and whether the rest was contaminated or not, something like this, right?
That's one of the considerations. You also need to consider the pharmaceutical actually makeup of that powder, because what will have gone up the chimney will have been the fines. So the particle size is very important. You also need to consider what the product is. So if the product is paracetamol, losing the fines isn't hugely important. If the product has a low therapeutic index, you need to understand the medicinal chemistry, then that is hugely important because that can affect the dosing of your product.
So in such cases, you would probably consult with some pharmacists, some people who could shed a bit of light about the material and about its functions.
Absolutely. And then there's a third element to that, which is, have you met your marketing authorization registered commitment? Because if you lose a lot of your product, then you have a registered batch size. And if you haven't met that registered batch size, you can't certify the product anyway.
So sometimes you think about the quality, and then you have also the authorization, the size of the batch. So it must be the minimum amount, right?
Absolutely.
Do you have another case?
So we have some more technical things where there are regulations about what you have to have in place to be able to manufacture, move around, and actually just do testing on medicines. So we have a lot of scenarios because we have a global supply chain. So what would you need to have in place when you have active pharmaceutical ingredient coming from China, then you bring it into the EU to manufacture your tablets, for example, and then it moves into a different country for packaging and distribution. How do you have all of the regulations that you need to have followed? What technical agreements do you need to have in place? What authorizations do you need to have in place? Do you need to make sure that you have a active pharmaceutical ingredient written confirmation from that country? If it comes from China, the answer is yes. If it comes from South Korea, you don't need one because they're on what's called the white list. Where does your QP declaration come into it? There's a lot of technical knowledge that you need to have to be able to double check that everything's in place, that your product is legally permitted to be certified.
Yeah, I know. I remember this also from my work. So we needed to release a medicine that goes to different countries, and you really need even to look at the label because it says so much and it carries so much importance. Because a small mistake on the label and it's stopped in the customs and that's it. It's shipped back. And then the whole batch is ruined. You really need to consider so many little things that come together in the end.
Absolutely. There's so many different things. And that's why the QP is a generalist, that we have to think of so many different areas.
Yeah, so it's really important that such a person works also in different environments to learn this experience. Otherwise, it's very theoretical, and you really need thousands of such simulations really to relieve such situations.
Yes, I feel that it is very important for QP trainees, delegates, to at least visit different types of facilities, to have physical sight of different types of equipment, water systems, for example. They are critical to the manufacture of so many different medicines. And if you haven't seen a water system that is manufacturing purified water or water for injection that is going to be used in your product, it's very difficult to visualize how that actually works and the impact that that can have on your product.
Yeah, so the water systems are complicated and have it's easily for them to be contaminated, and many oversee this fact, I guess. You see also a lot of warning letters by the FDA for such misconduct.
Absolutely, yes. There's a lot to do with the microbiology as well. So you're looking at the combination of the two and how they affect the final product and the impact on the patient.
So what would be your tips for someone who wants to become a QP? What steps should he take in his career to achieve this goal?
Remain curious. Even if you're quite early in your career, look at everything that you're currently doing. Pay attention. If you get the chance to go and look at a different department or a part of the factory or facility that you've not been to before, go to it, look at it, absorb as much as you can. If you're exposed to different products, read the patient information leaflet, learn about the products that you're exposed to, because you will learn so much, you will pick it up. Then as you develop through your career, move into the quality arena, do lots and lots of audits. Mm-hmm. When you're auditing places, you will see that quality systems, there are no two quality systems that are the same. They are very different. GMP is interpreted differently in every single country, every single company. Quality systems encompass much more than just GMP, so you will get much wider exposure there. And learn as much as you can from the people around you. Talk to people, ask them what they do, ask them why they do it. Remain that curious person, keep going, and you will make a really good QP.
Yeah, so curiosity is the key. always strive to learn new things, talk to people. And I think also, as you said, the audits are really important, especially external audits.
And active pharmaceutical ingredients and contract manufacturing organisations. The scope of audits, the cleaning company that does your cleaning for you, cardboard box manufacturers, the people who make the foil to put on your blisters, all absolutely fascinating and really helpful in helping you understand the bigger picture.
What mistakes, the biggest mistakes that you may have made that made you a better QP and you understood how important this role is?
Oh, I've made so many mistakes in my career, Jan. I think you learn from your mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes I think I made was not realizing how important the people side of things was. I'm quite academic in terms of how I approach things. And I always felt in the past that I could argue the case with facts. So when I was trying to persuade people that I was right, of course, always correct.
And then you realize people don't care about right. People have their own issues, and they feel this is the key point. They feel that they are right.
Mm-hmm. So I did change my tack, and I stopped saying no, you can't do it this way. I started saying yes, however, it will need this, and this, and this amount of money to do that.
Yeah, so I think like in every other position, the communication is key. I've also learned that as quality assurance, it's really easy to come to people and say, you can throw the SOP on their desk and say, please follow this. And then you have a lot of throwback. People don't really follow it. Maybe they hide deviations because they don't want to follow the procedures. But if you come to those people, explain them why you're doing this, what are the regulations, what are the consequences, I believe they would be more open.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I found is that if I find that people aren't following an SOP, for example, and I go and talk to them and ask them, why are you not following this SOP? What is it that's causing the problem? I'll often find that there's a problem with the SOP itself, and we can work together to make it better.
Sit together, work on the SOPs and the communication.
Yeah, collaboration works so much better.
Did you have to deal with a lot of such situations where people came and said, no, we don't want this change. We have been doing this for so long time. We don't want to change it. How do you deal with such situations?
It is natural for human beings to resist change. It is their normal state. So, certainly as a consultant now, that is very much my role to be a change champion, to help people manage their change. So, one of the things that I try and do is to go in and ask people, what is your current situation? How do you feel about a particular system, if that's what I've been asked to change? And then I sit and listen to all their moans and groans and what they feel is wrong with things. And then I ask them to say, well, how can we do it better? So again, they will give me their ideas of what should be done. And then we've got a slight new approach here because they've told me it's wrong. So now there's a little bit more acceptance that we're going to change things. So it sounds a little bit sneaky, but it does help enormously if you allow people to tell you how they feel first before you start implementing change. Mm-hmm. There's still going to be some resistance because once people are settled in a system, however difficult it is, they still don't want to change to a new system. But if you listen to them and you ask for their input. And then one of my main tips is simplification. So if you've got a complex system and you cut out a number of steps, that always helps sell it.
So you're also a consultant. You're not also training, you're doing a consultancy, and people should choose their consultant carefully. So you seem like a great consultant because you speak to people, and some consultants that would come, they will establish their standard procedures, the same that they are doing in each company. They just copy paste it, and then you have a real problem on your hands when they leave.
I don't know if you've heard of the KISS acronym, KISS, and no. I always say that is keep it simple and sustainable.
Keep it simple and sustainable. Okay. I will remember it. KISS. Okay, that's really interesting, because I find it really important that I worked with so many good consultants together, and I learned so much from them, and it's really great. And in the last position when I had to help in building quality systems. Before I came, there was a company, I won't name them, that just implemented some crazy stuff that completely don't fit the organization. And when they left, you stuck with unusable regulations, and then you have more mess that you need to clean up. It's not always easy when there are not enough experts in the company itself that can judge the work of the consultant.
Absolutely, that can be a difficulty, yes.
So what would you suggest for such companies that don't have enough experts of their own? How can they make sure that the work of consultants is right?
I think sometimes companies like that will go to a very expensive consultancy conglomerate, and that may not always be the right approach, because, as you say, those large consultancy firms have standard packages, plug and play, if you will.
Yeah.
Here's my package. This is what I'm going to give you. Like it or lump it. Is not really a good approach for a smaller company who wants something a little bit more agile, something that fits with them. I would suggest going to somebody who is agile and able to adapt more for them in their situation. Obviously, for me, I think it's different for each different set of circumstances. So it's really hard to recommend on a sort of standard scale.
So each case to its own. You need really to understand what you want, and maybe take two different consultants, or maybe take another consultant afterwards that reviews. Does it make sense?
That would be a good approach, yes.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes such consultants would sit together a bit, fight each other, but in the end they maybe come to a better solution.
I have to say that one of the things that I've tried to do recently is, rather than just work on my own, is to work with another consultant, so that I don't go down into sort of a spiral of just doing what I think is correct, that I'm cross-checking, that I've got somebody to bounce ideas off of, because it can get very isolated if you're just working on your own and you don't always double-check those ideas.
Do you bring somebody with you, or you suggest the company to hire someone additional support?
It's an informal arrangement with my network that I have. So I have a network of consultants and guys that I've worked with in the past, and I may not necessarily, obviously there's confidentiality involved. So what I'll do is I'll just throw out the question, if this was a situation and we were doing this, how would we resolve it? And we'll just have a conversation.
Really makes sense. Always work with somebody else, because, as you said, there are so many variables, and one person cannot know everything.
I always say to my students and to everybody, you are not a supercomputer.
What advice would you give such maybe small companies to retain to retain the knowledge that consultants bring? Because it's really easy to lose the knowledge after a really short time after the consultant actually leaves, which always happens.
That's a really good point, Jan. And what I've seen many companies do is put the consultant in an office and say, don't disturb them, they're busy, we're paying them a lot of money. Yeah, I would say that's a mistake. Bring the consultant into the environment and make sure that the consultant is talking to the relevant people in the organization. Bring them into training, so do things like lunch and learn, and impart that knowledge into the organization. So rather than just get the consultant to write some documents, it's very important that somebody who's bringing knowledge into your organization is actually talking to people, because there's implicit knowledge, there's explicit knowledge. And sometimes that implicit knowledge isn't being imparted. So those discussions are very, very important. The way that I was saying that I'm doing my consultancy is my preferred way is to hold workshops up front, as I said, and that brings me into contact with the people who have the company knowledge anyway, but it also helps them to feel comfortable with me and to be able to discuss with me and ask me questions as well. Knowledge management is an underpinning part of quality assurance anyway. Looking at ICHQ 10, it's right there. It's underpinning everything. So what you want to do is you want to actually document those discussions with your consultant in any way, form possible. So you should have a knowledge management process in your company and use that to document and manage anything that you are getting out of your consultant.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Qualitalks Podcast. If you did, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. Stay compliant and see you in the next one.